I'll be honest, I started writing this video and then it turned into a rant, but let's just jump into the script because I think it matters. I've heard it, you've heard it, we've all heard it. Palia is a game in beta, therefore nobody can criticize it. But what is beta exactly? Well, according to What Games Are, beta is a standard term to denote a milestone release during production in which game functionality is included and optimized, but may still have bugs, game content is finished, and which is considered nearly complete. Beta represents the total sum of what the game will be, and content or functionality changes beyond beta are usually considered to be outside the framework of a publishing contract. Or, as some people have answered the question online, beta is a prolonged excuse for broken games that lack adequate support. Now, using these definitions, or at least the first one, we can see some very glaring issues with Palia, as 2 of the 4 item bundles we know are in the game aren't even in the game. Events are being actively added, game features are still being implemented, and, most damning to me, the devs have already implemented ways of you giving them money. Because remember, beta testers are paid people. These aren't really things that a normal beta game would be focusing on because, well, as we saw in patch 168, splitting focus like this so close to launch has the capability of breaking so many things within the game. It's due to these reasons that I personally refer to this as a soft launch, and many people online tend to call it an early access. Now, some people might disagree and argue that the team has created all the features in the game and is slowly drip feeding them through the beta, because in today's world, you can't just release a full game. Let's be clear, if they'd created it all and are slowly releasing it, porches wouldn't be broken as they were, and 168 wouldn't have had nearly as many bugs as they did. It's clearly all last-minute implementation. But, to quote the original user, no game with an internet platform anywhere has been done like that, ever. Now, to be clear, what that user is describing as can't be done is the literal standard for how MMOs typically launch. And I'd know because I've been in a ton of closed and open betas for them. In their years of alpha, they build the features and content. Beta is typically more for minor bug fixing and server stressing, and launch is basically just beta with more players and less bugs. See World of Warcraft, SOTOR, and ESO, which all had this or very similar structures to it, and guess what? They all continued to release content after launch. It just went into its own testing pipeline with its own testing servers that were not connected to the public ones. Now, on the flip side of this coin, one very notable example of a game that didn't follow this model was Final Fantasy XIV's A Realm Reborn, which instead had 4 completely closed NDA testing phases in beta that each focused on different sections of the game, something more commonly seen with alpha testing. So why did they do this? Well, because they weren't building a game, they were rebuilding an already released one from the ground up. So they already had all of the assets and a lot of the code that was already needed for the groundwork. They just needed to figure out how to best put it all together in order to re-release a product in a way that actually worked. Okay, but there is one more type of beta MMO to talk about. And with these, I will look at ArcheAge. With this style, you can typically buy a founder's pack or a way to get into these early testing phases using cold, hard cash. And let me be clear, this worked for ArcheAge and other games like it because the game was fully developed and released for both Korea and Japan before being ported over to North America and Europe. The games were entirely functional. Entirely. They were just being localized. And for most other recent MMOs that use this style of beta, well, they typically fall into 2 categories. They're either an Eastern MMO being localized for Western markets, or they're Kickstarter scams with no plans for actual long-term development that just want your money as soon as possible. Like, well, name a Kickstarter MMO. No, seriously, you do it. I don't want to be sued for this. If you want more info on this style of MMO, I linked a Josh Strife Hayes video on the rise of, well, scam MMOs in the description. And before anyone comments, many scam MMOs are not exactly MMORPGs, believe it or not. MMO and MMORPG are different genres and they have their own places. Now, if you made it this far into the video, I'd like you to consider subscribing because it helps a lot, and also comment with your opinion. But also, I'd like to inform you that I have a stream schedule on both this YouTube channel and on Twitch. And here it is. If you have any questions or opinions you want to share about Palia or other farming sim games, feel free to bring them up and chat with me on, I don't know, my Palia stream on Wednesday here on this channel. Or if you want to watch me try other games, including Indian farming games, consider following my Twitch channel. This week I'll be continuing my Fae Farm playthrough and starting a new Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life game. And believe it or not, the streams are usually much more laid back and silly than these videos because, well, I do them to have fun. So with all that junk out of the way, where do we stand? Is Palia a beta game? Why did I bring up scams? And why am I still here covering this game? I do not believe that Palia is in any regard in a beta phase, no matter what the devs or many people online defending the game claim it to be. The progression systems aren't really well done. The bundles, romance, story, and quest systems weren't complete for either the closed or open playable slices of the game. And on top of this, as I've stated in a previous video, most of the promised content for the game still isn't anywhere to be seen. We don't have community goals and rewards, dynamic weather, the ability to visit friends' houses while they're offline, and for 6 out of 8 skills in the game, they're not really fun solo and better together. All of these are what I would graciously call alpha features. And for my last reason why we're not a beta, well, the characters and progression are not being wiped for release, so the game is effectively already released. Okay, so it's not a beta. What's the big deal? Well, player expectations is a big thing. You see, in a normal beta, players understand that bug fixes will need to happen, but because new content isn't being thrown into the mix every week or two, they are a priority. And this allows for the first public beta release to be, well, good. Another thing that a beta allows is for small economic changes, like what they've been trying to do, to be done without actually damaging the player base, because at the end of the beta, all of your progress is wiped and you're starting from zero. This gives everyone a fresh start at the same time. And finally, by focusing on bug fixes and tuning, you and your team actually have a focus and goals that players can follow and help with. And you don't get into situations where the main features of a patch early on is almost entirely cash shop locked, because that's not within the parameters of your tests. Doing a beta like Palia's is sort of just asking for trouble. And as I said again in my previous video, I don't think this game was really ready to make that step up. So I guess the next question is Palia a scam then? Because that's the next thing. And despite what every single word that their monetization lead says makes me think, I'm going to say no, it's not a scam. I believe Palia is a heavily mismanaged game being created by people who got in way over their heads and were given $50 million to do it. Now, I've heard people say this isn't a $50 million game, and Dad Joke Cinema brought up an interesting question recently. What does a $50 million game even look like? Well, World of Warcraft Rift and Terra, as well as most non-SOTOR MMOs, typically have a development budget between $50 and $65 million for their final release, not counting marketing, which is important. And for those wondering, SOTOR was reportedly a $150 million development cost and a very big marketing cost. Now, I should note that these prices are not adjusted for inflation, which is a very important thing to do, but I am super lazy, so let's look at a different game that I don't have all the financials for. Ashes of Creation. Now, a few years ago, this game had a little under $35 million as its development budget, and this was a game with much loftier goals, more intricate systems, and generally 150 times the world space and systems that needed to work together that Palia had. Did it meet its goals then? Oh, not even close. It's been 5 years since the game was supposed to launch, it's been continually hiring new staff, and it's been moved from Unreal Engine 4 to 5 in that time. All of this, and the game is actually still in alpha because, again, it isn't feature complete. Now, I bring up all of this to say I have no clue what a $30 to $50 million MMO would actually look like today because I haven't met a team stupid enough to try it who was able to actually successfully pull it off. Ashes of Creation was the last team to try, and I believe they're like 2 or 3 times over budget already. And this is also why I don't think that Palia is necessarily a scam. It's a game with now way too many staff for their budget, a leadership team who, like Ashes of Creation, heavily underestimated the costs of making an MMO, and one that was originally pitched as a virtual world that players could interact with and influence, with each player's role in the world being entirely up to them. Pretty far from the MMO farming sim community game that they ended up making. What do I think happened? I think that after they got their first millions, that they ended up trying to build up a prototype and figured out a bunch of ideas that would end up being fairly difficult to actually implement. And with that, they settled on an MMO instead of the virtual world that they were originally going to make. And if you don't know, virtual world is a different category of online games that predates MMOs, and they're pretty complicated to explain. But with these changes, they got more rounds of money and didn't really have a solid goal for what their final product would actually be. In 2021, they released words of a pre-alpha, a stage before even the alpha testing, which is a phase that on its own is a place that many MMOs spend years in before even going to alpha or beta. But with this announcement, they made a ton of promises that they had no way of knowing how to deliver, and they likely hadn't even created a central Bible for their game's gameplay, lore, character tenets, or feel, as we can see from the wildly different gameplay feel of their recent event. Instead, they spent the last 2 years trying to work on what this game would become, all while continually hiring people and still not really developing that Bible. Then 2023 hit, and the team noticed something bad was happening. They were running out of money, and with that, they were left with only one choice. They needed to release as soon as possible, no matter what the state of the game. If not, well, the studio wouldn't last the year. Because believe it or not, all the money that they raised for the game would actually need to be paid back to the venture capitalists they borrowed it from. This isn't Kickstarter. And yeah, this all leads me to, well, the last question I brought up. Why am I still here talking about this game? There are many people that have yelled at me video after video that I need to stop talking about the game or telling me that I hate it, which is odd coming from a community that's supposed to be nice to each other, but whatever. I hate to tell you this, but I don't hate the game. Not at all. Matter of fact, I've been following this thing for, well, years now. Probably longer than most people in the community, as I joined the community literally day one of them opening their Discord after the announcement trailer. At this point, all I want is for the team to stop digging their own grave and actually work toward the product that they've been selling us since the beginning. Now, with that said, even if this game were to fail tomorrow, I do think that Singularity 6 did something that no other team had with a game like Palia. It showed the world that there is an untapped niche in the MMO market that many players want filled. And if Singularity 6 refuses to work toward it, then I'm actually hopeful that another company will step in to fill it. I'm just hoping it's not EA. But hey, if anyone wants a consultant or something on one of these games, let me know. I'm actively looking for remote work at the moment, and I can't do worse than every other person in charge of a Kickstarter MMO. But yeah, no, I do believe in what the game was originally pitched as, and I think they've been taking a lot of wrong steps, especially some of their people who keep posting blogs and answers to questions that make things much worse. And with that said, thanks to coming to my video, which turned into a bit of a rant, but whatever. I'd like to thank these people here for making this video possible, especially Susie and Annie for joining on YouTube, and thank you for watching.